Kings 15. 2 Kings 15. All right, just a really quick refresher. We talked last week about Zechariah, which I said, sorry, Zachary, I think we picked the wrong name. Should have been Zechariah or something. There's a good Zechariah in the Bible. But anyway, we talked about his reign, and particularly, it wasn't a very long reign. He only reigned 6 months, and we see that he was overthrown. And I spent most of the time talking about how the Bible said that Jehu, his children would be on the throne for 4 generations. You know, you're up into the 4th generation. So we see that that ended with Zechariah. Now, I'm going to, I originally, when we first started, I tried to keep these somewhat in the order, of the reign and kind of a gap where the other ones go, but it just got too filled up, and I can't make this board any bigger, okay? So I just kind of moved all those up, and then whoever we're dealing with, I'll try to give that. So we've already talked about on the southern kingdom of Judah, Uzziah, and then his son Jotham's kind of a co-reign whenever he got leprosy. And so in the story we've read, they've already passed away. They're off the scene now, but now it goes back and says, in the such and such year of Azariah or Uzziah, then these guys reign. So you know how the drill is. We're going to go back and do that. And I'm going to show you that after Zechariah, we're going to have 5 different, well, I think including Zechariah, 5 different kings, like boom, 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 and it's all going to be in the reign of these 2. So once again, another thing we discovered last week, we talked about, is that most of these northern kings, from Israel, they're not really talked about in Chronicles, because Chronicles seems to be just primarily Judah. Now, there's some mention of some of them, but primarily it's dealing with the northern tribe. Chronicles is dealing with the southern tribe, and then the northern tribe is mostly going to be in Kings, but Kings deals with both of them. So we talked about that a little bit last week. I was actually kind of learned something new on that, because I always said, after you go through the Kings, then you read Chronicles, and every time in the Kings it says, and the rest of the story of Asa, king of Judah, is it not written in the book of the Chronicles? I always thought that meant the Chronicles that we have in the Bible. Then I realized sometimes it says the Chronicles of Judah, sometimes it says the Chronicles of Israel, and when you go there, it's not there, and so I realized that we're talking about different books that aren't actually, they weren't inspired, they aren't in the Bible. And actually, I'm going to preach a message. I can't even remember if it's next Wednesday here or Thursday in Kansas City. I can't remember which one it is, but it's the uninspired versions, not versions, the uninspired books in the Bible. Somebody read that and said, "Man, that's going to be a short message," because he thought I was saying like the books of the Bible that aren't inspired by God. No, the Bible actually mentions a lot of books that we don't have any access to. We don't know what it is and what they say. And so I'm going to talk about that at some point. And I believe that this is probably what it's talking about, these extra chronicles of the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel, probably not even mentioned. So all we have is what's recorded in the Kings and what's recorded in the Chronicles. And that doesn't give us a lot as far as right now talking about these kings. We can't go to Chronicles and find out more information. So therefore, and this is good news for the fact that we're making through some more kings. We're getting this done a little bit faster, because we're going to fly through 4 or 5 kings in no time at all. So you're in 2 Kings chapter 15, or let's see, are we still in 15? Yeah. 2 Kings chapter 15, and let's start with verse 8. And you don't have to stand, but I'm just going to read all the way down to verse 27. So 2 Kings 15, verse 8 says, "In the 28th year of Azariah," that's Uzziah, king of Judah, "did Zechariah the son of Jeroboam reign over Israel in Samaria, 6 months. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, as his father had done. He departed not from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. And Shallum, the son of Jabesh, conspired against him, and smote him before the people, and slew him, and reigned in his stead. And the rest of the acts of Zechariah, behold, they are written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel. This was the word of the Lord, which he spake unto Jehu, saying, Thy sons shall sit on the throne of Israel unto the 4th generation. And so it came to pass. Shallum, the son of Jabesh, began to reign in the 30th year of Uzziah, king of Judah. All right, so now we've already seen on the year of Uzziah, I know it's confusing because it also says Azariah, but the same person. It said the 38th year. Zechariah reigned 6 months, and so we're now in the 39th year of Azariah, and so it says that. And it says he reigned a full month of Samaria. For Menahem, the son of Gadai, went up from Tirzah and came to Samaria and smote Shallum, the son of Jabesh, in Samaria, and slew him, and reigned in his stead. And the rest of the acts of Shallum and his conspiracy which he made, behold, they are written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel. Then Menahem smote Tifsa and all that were therein, and the coast thereof from Tirzah, because they opened not to him. Therefore he smote him, and all the women therein that were with children he ripped up. In the 39th year of Azariah, so now we're still in the 39th year, Menahem, the son of Gadai, began Menahem, the son of Gadai, to reign over Israel, and he reigned 10 years. Ooh, long stretch. Now he actually reigns for 10 whole years in Samaria. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. He departed not all his days from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. And Pul, the king of Assyria, different country, we're not talking about Israel right now, came against the land, and Menahem gave Pul 1,000 talents of silver, and his hand might be with him to confirm the kingdom in his hand. And Menahem exacted the money of Israel, even of all the mighty men of wealth, of each man 50 shekels of silver, and give to the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria turned back and stayed not there in the land. The rest of the acts of Menahem and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? And Menahem slept with his fathers, and Pekahiah, his son, reigned in his stead. In the 15th year of Azariah, king of Judah, 50th year of Azariah. Remember, we just had a Menahem reign for 10 years, and so we're in the 39th year, now the 49th year. So now we're getting into the 50th year, so you can, tell time all by the year that Uzziah reigned. Azariah, king of Judah, Pekahiah, the son of Menahem, began to reign over Israel. He reigned 2 years. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. Again, he departed not from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. But Pekah, the son of Remaliah, a captain of his, conspired against him and smote him in Samaria, in the palace of the king's house, with Ergob and Ariah, and with him 50 men of the Gileadites. And he killed him and reigned in his room. And the rest of the acts of Pekahiah and all that he did, behold, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? In the 52nd year of Azariah, 52nd year now, king of Judah, Pekah, the son of Remaliah, began to reign over Israel in Samaria, and he reigned 20 years. That's a really long stretch there. After this, Azariah will be dead, and Jeroboam is the only, Jotham is the only, is in full reign. All right. I turned my head and I forgot where we were. 29. In the days of Pekahiah, king of Israel, came Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and he took Ijon and Abel-Beth-Maachah and Jonah and Kedesh and Hazor and Gilead and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali, and carried them captive to Assyria. And Hoshea, the son of Elah, made a conspiracy against Pekah, the son of Remaliah, and smote him and slew him, and reigned in his stead in the 20th year of Jotham, the son of Uzziah. The rest of the acts of Pekah and all that he did, behold, they are written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel. In the 2nd year of Pekahiah, the son of Ramah, king of Israel, began Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, to reign. 25 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Jerusha, the daughter of Zadok. He did that which was right in the sight of the Lord. He did according to all that his father Uzziah had done, howbeit the high places were not removed. Now, I talked about them already. Okay, so we've gone now, again, what we've already talked about of the southern kingdom, and now we've filled in a little bit of the blanks of what's happened over in the north in Israel. And once again, we find it's an absolute mess. Okay? In fact, as I read this, it sounds a whole lot like it reminds me of the time of Asa. You remember, Asa had a long stretch. He was king. It seemed like they were at peace. All the days of Baasha, they were at war. He was at war with Asa. But then it was just constantly somebody rising up and trying to kill this king, and someone rising up and trying to kill this king. And some of them were hardly in there just like a month or however long before someone rised up and killed him. And so, rather than having, once again, a line of this, his son reigned, his son reigned, his son reigned, his son reigned. Here it's like sometimes the son makes it, but then somebody rises up, one of his captains, and turns on him, and there's like a mutiny or whatever, and they conspire against him. And it's just like constant fighting and battling, and the kings, all of them are wicked. None of them are doing right. We had just one little spark of good from Jehu, who killed a bunch of people on both sides to get them right with God, and it wasn't long before that went bad again, and so now we're back to just a really bad situation. Okay, so let me fill in these names real quick. There's not that much to say about them because they're just really, they're just kind of like blips in the history, it looks like, as far as the Bible's concerned. Okay, so number one, we had Zechariah. He served 6 months. Then we have Shalom, who serves only a month before he's killed. Shalom rised up against Zechariah. Now, Menahem is going to rise up against him. Menahem actually ends up, he's only in for a month, 6 months, month, and now he's actually going to be in for 10 years, so kind of a long stretch there. But still, the Bible doesn't say much about him. Then we have Pekahiah. And then we have Pekah. And during his reign, Jotham is now in full force. While his dad has leprosy, he's has a co-regency, but now he's in full force whenever Pekah's in. And then we'll come and talk about Hoshea at another time. So this is where we are in the time frame. And I don't know what I'm going to do. We got a few more to go. I don't know what we'll do about this list. We're getting to an end on Israel's side, though. Okay, so again, thinking through this again, it reminded me of when we were up reading about Asa. And there was just constantly fighting and battling for the throne on this side. And over here, they're doing pretty good. Now, there became some wickedness that got into Judah here. You remember Joash almost was cut out, and then they wouldn't have had a king, but God spared them and kept the throne. But it came back around. Now we got good kings. Not perfect. Obviously, he lifted up in pride, and God dealt with him. Still worshiping in the high places. They haven't eliminated all of that. But these are guys that are serving the Lord and trying to do right. And there seems to be some relative peace in the land. There's not a lot of fighting. There's not the conspiracies. They just accept who their leader is, and that is that. So I want to spend a little bit of time here. It won't be very long. And I want to mention some things here as far as the title of the message is Fighting for the Throne. Fighting for the throne. And that's what's going on if you are reading this, and just one after another, these kings are talked about. Not a whole lot to say about them. They went to war. When they turn their back, somebody else conspires against them and kills them, and then he's reigning. And then, man, it's just like that. There's no peace. There's no good things talked about in the land. There's not great accomplishments. at least over here there are. Although they're not perfect, they're still following God, and there's some good things going on. Over here, not so. And one of the reasons, I believe, is because of the fact that they're fighting for the throne. They're not doing the job that they're supposed to do because they're sitting there trying to advance themselves and prosper themselves and kill the king so that they can be there. And once they get into the kingdom, they're going to kill everybody in the royal family before them so that nobody can attack them. But then their captain's going to rise up. And everyone's just trying to advance themselves, and they're only thinking about themselves. And so point number one I want to make is when God's hand is off a people, or we could say a movement, a group of people, or even a church, if God's hand is off of it, they will fight for a position of leadership. Okay, that's all it is. When man in his natural state is not going to want to submit to his authority, he's going to want to rise, and I want that position, even if he knows he can't get that position. And I've seen this in churches, and I've seen this at jobs that I've worked at, or whatever. Like, even though these employees, for instance, at a job, know that they can't be the boss, they don't have the credentials, they're not good enough, whatever. But if you really break it down, it's like they want to be in charge. Nothing the boss does is good enough. Like, they criticize everything that he does, and they kind of have this mindset like, if I was boss, I would do this or I would do that. Even if they can never be boss, in their mindset, it's not about the company, it's not about the good, it's just about what they want. And in a church situation, what a terrible thing that would be. In a situation where God's people are supposed to be governed, they should be seeking, hey, what is God's will? What does God want? And if they're only seeking their own advancement, you know what you're going to have? Fighting. And I think I can do this. We read about in the life of Moses where the sons of Korah rise up and they're like, yeah, well, we're holy too. We could do what you're doing. We could offer incense. It doesn't work out so well for them, okay, because they weren't following God. And in that situation, God was in charge. Here, God was sort of, and I hate saying at any time that God's not in charge, but you understand, we don't believe that God makes everybody like a robot and you got to do what he tells you to do. God sometimes kind of removes himself from the situation and allows our free will to kind of just control things. He'll step in when he has to make sure, like in the sake of saving Joash, he'll step in and make sure that certain things happen. But for the most part, our free will is what gets us in trouble, or sometimes will even advance us in certain situations. And so, if you remember, Jehu, he did some pretty good things, and God said, I'm going to protect you. My hand's going to be upon you for 4 generations. And so you have these guys, and we talked about good evil kings and evil good kings, remember, or bad good kings and good bad kings. And the thing was, they weren't all that terrible, but they still weren't serving God. But it seemed like they had some peace. It seemed like, they are seeking the man of God. Elijah, they're talking, or Elisha, I should say, he's going and seeking him. And there's different things where there's a semblance because of Jehu and because of God's covenant with him, where God's protecting his generation for 4 years. Now God's hands off, and what happens? It's not sons anymore. Now it's just fighting for the position and trying to get the next one in line. And I can't remember, a couple of these are sons, but most of them are just like their captain, just like up here. Captain raised up and try to slay everybody and take that position. And so when God's hand is off of a people group, the people are just going to fight for leadership. And if you ever find yourself in a church, and a member of a church where everybody's just fighting and there's just no one wants to submit to anyone's authority, you could pretty much rest assured those people aren't seeking God's will. And his hand's not upon them, guiding them and directing them. They're all just trying to seek their own advancement and their own will. And that's true with anything, but we're talking about God's people in Israel and Judah, or mostly Judah at this point. And so we can apply it to God's people as far as the New Testament church, but we definitely want to stay in God's will. What happens is, when God's not the one that's in charge, when we're not seeking his will and his rules, you have kind of like anarchy. And anarchy, the reason anarchy doesn't make sense, you could probably think of a lot of reasons, but if you could get the government down to where, we're just going to trust the people and we're going to back off, we don't need government, Just let everybody just kind of like rule themselves or whatever. You know what would happen? It would be survival of the fittest. And some, just wicked person who was stronger than everybody else, had more power, had more money than everybody else, would rise up and he would take control. That's even going to be a threat in our kind of government that we have right now if the people aren't alert, because it doesn't take much for these powerful and rich people to get in there and control stuff. But when God's hands off of it, that's all you have. People trying to control and get ahead and all that kind of stuff. We certainly don't want that in a church setting among God's people. Look at Psalm 127. We'll come right back to. Actually, I don't even know if we're going to come back to Kings. You can get rid of Kings now. Go to Psalm 127. In verse 1 says, "Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain." All right, it's not wrong for somebody to use their skills to build something. It's not wrong for the watchmen, the people that have been trained, the law enforcers and the protectors and the governing officials. It's not wrong for them to do their job and to govern and do all these kinds of things. But the reality is, if they're doing it on their own and the Lord's not the one that's in charge and we're not following His purpose, it's all in vain. And if a pastor comes into a church and he's just trying to take the leadership and he's trying to make his own decisions and decide how things are done, and he's competing with other people or whatever the case may be, and God's not the one that's building it, they labor in vain. It's just a vain attempt. And so we want to make sure that we follow God and we have His hand of protection, not just upon 4 generations, but hopefully generation after generation after generation. When people are fighting for the throne, this is the second point. Second point, when people are fighting for the throne, they aren't protecting the people. You see, their job in leadership is to provide and to protect the people and to govern the people. And if they're spending all their time trying to advance themselves and working on their own agendas, hey, do we ever see that in government? Do we ever see that in even church leadership and all, where they're so focused on their own agendas and their own purposes and plans that they're not spending their time actually leading and guiding the people? This is a huge danger. And this is something we got to fight against and really be careful, because if they're spending their time fighting for the throne, then they aren't doing what they're supposed to do in protecting the people. The leader can't do his job of leading if he's spending all his time defending himself from these other things. Matthew chapter 23. There's an interesting principle in the Bible that if a man is following God and God's in charge, then it doesn't really matter that the qualities of that man, how strong he is, how smart he is, how good looking he is, whatever, makes very little difference, right? Because he's following God. God's in charge. God can work with anything. So when you look at the Bible's, the great victories in the Bible, you think about Gideon. And I'm not saying Gideon, he was a valiant man. I'm not saying he wasn't a good guy, wasn't strong or whatever. But in the scheme of things, he was pretty weak. And you know what even happened? Even as he began to raise his army, God said, nope, your army's too big. If you win this war, you're going to start thinking high of yourself and say, well, it's just because look at all these great skilled trained men and the sword of the Lord and of Gideon, and you're going to think highly of yourself. So he eliminated to where he had an army of 300, which would have been, humanly speaking, impossible for him to defeat the armies that they went up against. But God said, I want to eliminate that and humble you to the point where you realize, it's not me running this thing, it's God running this thing. And in leadership of those who are following God, it can be a very humble leader. He doesn't have to be super skilled, doesn't have to be great, doesn't have to be intelligent, and God can use that. So Matthew 23, look at verse 9. And of course, Jesus is rebuking the Pharisees here, and he's calling them out, and he says, call no man, well, he's talking to his disciples now, but he's doing this in the presence of the Pharisees. Call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father which is in heaven. So don't call your pastor father so and so. That's not biblical, okay? Neither be ye called masters, for one is your master, even Christ. But he that is greatest among you shall be your servant. And whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased, and he that shall humble himself shall be exalted. You see, the strongest spiritual leaders are just servants. They're not interested in advancing themselves. They want to follow God, and they want to rule and protect the people in the right way. And so if a person's following God, if God's in charge, then it doesn't really matter so much how wonderful of a leader the person is that's leading. But the people that are putting this guy in charge, they have to acknowledge God and understand that he's in control, and they need to submit to that. Okay, look at Hebrews chapter 13. And this comes up, quite a bit when we're talking about this, because I think it's so great. When it comes to this topic like this, is exactly what we need to hear, what we need to know. Obey them that have the rule over you, and submit yourselves, for they watch for your souls. Okay, that's their job, is they're watching for you. That's what they're supposed to be doing. If they're doing it right, if they're not just going about their own agendas, as they that must give an account, must give account. And so let's back up. Obey them that have rule over thee, that they may do it with joy and not with grief, for that is unprofitable for you. And I love that passage because it really lets us know that just like God, whose commandments to us aren't grievous, the reason we're supposed to submit ourselves to God's commandments is because they're good for us, right? They even if they weren't, I guess we should submit. But God's saying, look, if you will just submit to my commandments, it's going to be good for you. It's going to be bad if you steal. It's going to be bad if you commit fornication, if you commit adultery. It's going to be bad if you drink alcohol and if you do all these things. And so the Bible says, stay away from these things and flee these things. It's not because God just hates you and doesn't want you to have any fun. It's because he's protecting you and doesn't want you to do those things. And so the thing is true for a person that's leading under God's control. Submit yourselves to them because they're watching for your soul. They're going to give an account to God. And if you will submit to them, their job's going to be easier. And I say this every time I talk about this verse. I say that of this church, since I've been the pastor, man, it's been, compared to all the horror stories I've heard growing up and some of the churches I've been in, whatever, you guys have just given me full reign to do whatever, and maybe sometimes that's a little scary with the response, because with that comes responsibility. But but I do appreciate that. It makes my job so much easier. I can make a decision and be like, man, how am I going to explain it? I feel so weird, like people aren't going to understand this decision, but I really feel that's what we got to do. And I'll make this announcement, and I'll be like, all right, let's see the feedback. And there's no, or the pushback. There's no pushback. People are like, all right, if that's what God wants us to do, we'll do it. I'm telling you, that's just such a breath of fresh air. And I know this could be very self-serving, and and I could be saying this, taking advantage of the situation, but that's not the case. This is the biblical way. If God's in charge, the leader's going to submit himself to God, and the people are going to just trust that. And you know what they're not going to have? All the fighting and the conspiracies and the rising up and all the things. These guys didn't get anything accomplished for the Lord. It just got more and more wicked. And even though guys would stand up and they'd make alliance with this other country and they would do that and they would grow and they would have all these great things, the people would end up worshiping Baal. And they would worshiping other gods and fighting each other and doing all wickedness. Whereas at least over here they had some semblance of, in some cases, this guy's going to be in charge. 7 years old, 16 years old whenever he begins to reign. And it's just like, how many people on this side would have been like, that ain't going to happen. We're not going to allow that to happen. But over there they said, if that's what God wants, he's the one that's called that lineage and called that line, and we're trusting them. They to do what God told them to do. And it worked for them. Like they were preserved until the time of Christ, and wasn't perfect, but there were still semblances of godly people in there. Whereas on this side, not even close. They're all wicked. They're all fighting and all that kind of stuff because they're fighting for the throne. God's not in charge. And so the final point, and this has kind of already been alluded to, but when a person rules in their own strength, all the people suffer. It's not just that leader who's just trying to get ahead and trying to do things, and he's going to suffer for it, but not just that, all the people that he's supposed to be leading are going to suffer for it. So our foundation as Christians is always going to be Jesus Christ. The foundation of everything we do, what does Jesus want us to do? What's his word say? That's our foundation. So look at Psalm chapter 11. Psalm chapter 11. Verse 3 says this: If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? Now, as Christians, you can rest assured you don't have to fear this, because your foundation, Jesus Christ, is never going to be destroyed. Now, if I was building my foundation on a political party, oh no, my political party's been destroyed. Now there's another party that's in the office, then guess what? There's nothing I can do now, and that's not true either. But you know what I'm saying? Theoretically, like if all you're leaning on is your party and it doesn't get in, what am I going to do? My foundation's been destroyed. If all you're relying on is your finances in life, like everything's based on how rich I'm going to be, how stable my finances are, or whatever, well, what are you going to do when that's destroyed? What are you going to do? But the reality is, a Christian, our foundation can never be destroyed. We have got that until, or even after, but we got that till the day we die. When we get to heaven, it's all based on Jesus Christ. Everything we're doing is adding upon that. He's building the house. He's building it upon the foundation, which is Jesus Christ. Like, all we got to do is get along for the ride and submit ourselves and do the best we can. If we rise up and try to take things into our own hands, we look like that. And it's not just affecting these leaders, but it affects all their people. All the people of the kingdom went after other gods, and they got destroyed. And every time, this one person rose up against that king, the whole family would be destroyed. And it was just wickedness on every level, all because these kings didn't submit themselves, and the people didn't submit themselves. They had raised somebody else to take over. When God is at the foundation, He's never going to be destroyed. So, our kingdom, so to speak, is based on God. If our country collapses, it's not my foundation. My foundation is still secure. On Christ, the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. I don't have to worry about that. If I'm part of some movement, I don't want to say the church, because Jesus built the church. That's not going to crumble as long as we'll stay his church. But a movement, maybe like a fellowship, the BBFI or some kind of, they're not going to last. If something happens in the leadership behind a movement like that, crumbles and they're no longer following God, I don't have to worry about it. You know what? Jesus is still my foundation. It might move, around a little bit. There might be some flexibility, but it's not gonna change my worldview, my outlook on life, or what I do with my life, because Jesus is my foundation. And so I'm not worried about building my foundation on men or on a movement or on a country or a political party or anything like that. So I guess then to that, the conclusion of the whole thing is simply this: keep God on the throne. Okay? Now, we all have places in our lives where we're going to have to rule something that God put us over to rule. Rule the best of your ability. Rule over your family, if you're head of your house. Rule over your children. Rule over, if you're at a job and you're in charge of people, you're in a management or something. Rule wisely, rule well over that, but keep God on the throne at all times, and you don't have to worry about all these other things and the fighting and the bickering and all the things that will destroy you. Keep the foundation, Jesus, and don't get off of it. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your word and this time that we have studying the Kings, and something that can be quite confusing, and we can read it over and over in our Bibles and not really see some of these things. So I thank you for the opportunity to go through that and going through Judges in the morning and all the things, Lord, that we're seeing from the Bible. I pray you help us remember them and apply them to our lives and help us grow. And as we have an interest in a desire to learn your word, I pray you bless this church, our efforts to serve you and to reach others and preach the gospel and just to show love one for another. Lord, I pray you bless that and that we be fruitful and bring honor and glory to your name. In Jesus' name I pray.